Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has hit the gaming world by storm. This fantastical turn-based RPG racked up critical acclaim on its way to being one of the most highly rated turn-based games in recent years. First impressions suggest an impressive graphical effort too, packing great art and ray tracing. But with the often heavy Unreal Engine 5 at its core, exactly how well does Expedition 33 stick the landing on current-gen consoles? Expedition 33 is often very beautiful. It does a particularly great job of presenting new and interesting environments for the player to explore. Some of these are more conventional. The game opens in a crowded 19th century city, for instance, but the game trends towards more and more fantastical locales as it progresses, including this Coraline environment that is underwater in every sense but literally, or this crimson forest populated by mechanical wooden dolls. Each area is visually distinct and has key visual signatures that keep it memorable. Between those locations, you traverse on a large overworld map, with a zoomed-out camera and distorted scale. It feels like an homage to older RPGs, and helps to make the world feel plausibly large. Most of the gameplay takes place in restricted, linear levels, so the overworld feels comparatively freeing. Key to Expedition 33's environmental rendering is the trifecta of key Unreal Engine 5 rendering features: Lumen, Nanite, and Virtual Shadow Maps. Lumen GI helps to provide a good sense of indirect diffuse lighting, and it typically does a good job, though its quality varies somewhat. These simple city streets are captured in suitable detail and look quite handsome, I would say, but smaller scale detail sometimes isn't depicted accurately and can look like it is floating and not effectively grounded in the environment. Some of these quibbles might have been resolved with the triangle-based hardware Lumen, but here we're just seeing its SDF-based software variety. The game's reflections also get the Lumen treatment, though most of the game's areas are rough, foliage-covered, and don't receive much of a boost from the technique. On smooth surfaces, though, you can kind of make out the blobby SDF geometry representations. Generally, the game keeps its reflections a little more diffused, so these limitations aren't very noticeable. Nanite is also used here, which means that the game doesn't really suffer from LOD popping at all. Mesh quality is generally pretty high as well, and with Nanite comes Virtual Shadow Maps, which effectively provide depth and direct lighting occlusion. Even relatively minor detail is properly shadowed here. The game is mostly naturally lit, so you don't see too many non-shadow casting exceptions in the world. VSMs also appear to use Unreal's shadow map ray tracing technique to correctly diffuse shadows as they fall away from the casting object, at least on the PS5 Pro quality mode as we're seeing here. Curiously though, some areas don't seem to use the technique, so shadows tend to look a bit over-sharp in those cases. Expedition 33 is perhaps at its best when you are poring over its dense playable areas, but the game also features a lot of cutscenes as well. These mostly are quite effective. A high-quality depth of field is used liberally, for instance. The metahuman-based characters are well modeled and rendered, and cinematic direction is often quite striking. Facial animation is a little less polished, however, with lip sync that is often pretty spotty. The characters emote well enough, but the visual-vocal match can be a bit questionable. Plus, some of the game's cutscenes, in particular a couple in roughly the first hour or so of the game, are poor quality FMVs with obvious macro blocking. It's not a huge deal, but it does diminish the impact of some pivotal scenes. This game comes in under 50 gigabytes, so I think better video quality wouldn't have taken up unwarranted storage. The game's battle sequences are another visual highlight. The attack animations are excellent and coincide with fiery particle effects and bold camera moves, and menus are slickly designed. I think this is the most visually engaging turn-based combat I've ever seen. There are a few elements here that feel very Persona-inspired, but the execution is so good that it's hard to find any faults. Overall, I think Expedition 33 is a very good-looking Unreal Engine 5 title, and it's one of the most graphically pleasing current-gen RPGs. Despite a few minor quibbles, it's delivering a top-notch aesthetic experience that looks consistently high quality when exploring or engaging in fights. And that's a particular accomplishment because Expedition 33 was reportedly developed by a core development team of around 30 people over 5 years, plus a small external gameplay animation team and localizers, QA, and session musicians. This game has visual quality in a lot of areas that rivals modern AAA games, but was developed under more serious resource constraints. I doubt that would have been possible on any other commercially available engine, except for UE5, which solves many current-gen rendering problems out of the box. I primarily played the game on a PS5 Pro console in quality mode, which is where I've captured the footage seen so far. But there is a 60 FPS targeting performance mode as well. The primary difference between the two modes on PS5 Pro comes down to lighting. Lumen quality takes a hit in performance mode with less accurate indirect diffuse lighting quality. Reflections take a slight clarity hit, but the bigger impact comes down to a lowered roughness cutoff, as lumen reflections don't appear on rougher materials like this raised metallic design. Virtual shadow maps also don't feature shadow map ray tracing in performance mode, though the impact here depends on the scene. This is the most conspicuous visual difference, something that's easy to notice without a head-to-head comparison. I imagine the developer has probably knocked Expedition 33 down a UE5 settings preset, at least with respect to those key settings. I'm sure there are other tweaks, but the lighting changes are the most obvious. There are also some image quality differences. Expedition 33 doesn't have amazing image quality on consoles and seems to be using an analytical upscaling technique, likely TSR. Expect a fair bit of aliasing and shimmer, which is worse in the performance mode. Plus, the performance mode also looks a bit softer. In resolution terms, we're looking at about 1080p in performance mode and about 1440p in quality mode in typical play, though DRS is clearly in use, and both are upsampled to a higher resolution. Enabling film grain and chromatic aberration also substantially softens the image, which is worth keeping in mind in any mode configuration. I've recorded my capture with both effects off. Frame rates are generally very good here. In performance mode, we're looking at a fairly steady 60 FPS, occasionally interrupted by an over-budget frame, most obviously certain enemy attacks. Quality mode meanwhile runs at a very stable 30 FPS, which is essentially locked throughout the run of play in my experience. Cutscenes though in both modes run at an unstable 30 FPS, with a broken framerate cap and some genuine performance-related dips. I'd lean towards the 60 FPS mode here for most players, if only because Expedition 33 relies on very precise timing for parries and dodges. Most turn-based titles would feel perfectly fine at 30, but here I feel my gameplay capacity slips substantially at the lower update rate. Moving down the ladder, PS5 actually looks very similar to PS5 Pro. Both modes here closely resemble their PS5 Pro counterparts, though there are some small lumen GI differences in both modes. But by and large, the two offer a very similar visual experience. Resolution does take a hit though. In this shot, for instance, PS5 performance counts at 864p, down from 1080p on Pro, and PS5 quality counts at 1224p, down from 1512p on Pro. Frame rates here are much like the system's more powerful sibling, which is to say, very good. The performance mode again is a generally good 60 FPS, with some dips noticeable during intense moments, while the quality mode hugs 30 FPS reliably. Series X again has a very similar visual feature set. There are some lumen differences here, though I'm not sure what exactly to chalk this up to. In one of my comparison shots, there's a marked difference between Series X and the two PS5s, but elsewhere they look more or less the same. Resolutions count in similar ranges to the base PS5, with similar image quality. Frame rates again are very good. I didn't have as much time to play through the Xbox Series release, but suffice to say that it's very similar to the other machines in my playthrough. Performance mode is at 60 with dips, quality mode at 30, and cutscenes are at a wobbly 30. The three more premium consoles then generally operate without much distinction, but Series S is a big break from that pattern. There's just one visual mode, targeting a 30 FPS update, but it's pretty compromised. The reflection setting here isn't using lumen, instead relying on screen space reflections with a rough GI approximation of specular response as a fallback when SSR information isn't available. This is a standard performance optimization we often see in Series S software, but it does negatively impact the visuals quite a bit. The game's GI has been simplified as well, and lacks the fine per-pixel detail that the other consoles feature. It's a bit annoying and does substantially reduce the visual impact of the game in many lighting conditions. I also noticed a very odd issue during my capture runs. Shadowed regions of the opening area had bizarre splotches of oddly colored light, likely a problem with lumen. Restarting the game fixed the issue. The internal resolution is fine here, at least at about 900p in my counts. Actual image quality on display is substantially worse than the Series X performance mode though, likely because of a lowered upscale target. Frame rates are generally fine here, with the game more or less locking to 30 FPS outside of some wobbly cutscene sequences. Only getting 30 FPS is a bit of a disappointment here though, if only because some of the boss battles really do benefit from being able to up the refresh to 60 FPS. I can imagine beating the game on Series S would be substantially more challenging than the other console platforms as a result. As one final note on configuration, Expedition 33 runs without HDR support on all platforms. On PS5 and PS5 Pro, the game will switch into an HDR mode, but it doesn't display correctly. I've enjoyed what I've played of Expedition 33 for a few reasons. I really admire its narrative efficiency. You understand the rough contours of the story within about the first hour, and the game proceeds at a solid pace from there, doling out story beats liberally. By RPG standards, it's not crazy long, but it justifies its time effectively. There's definitely room for RPGs like Persona 5, which are more ponderous efforts, but I appreciated the narrower focus. The combat system is also quite engaging. Visual fireworks certainly help, but the core gameplay is satisfying, blending turn-based weakness and debuff-oriented combat with timing-based action elements. If I had any particular complaint, it's that it possibly comes on a little too fast for its own good, with complex ability sets introduced quickly and combo systems that differ on a per-character basis. It's also a bit on the tough side on the default difficulty. It helps a lot that the game's stylistic choices remain engaging throughout, with its aforementioned graphical strengths and bold UI playing a big role. It's scored effectively as well, with over 8 hours of music and some memorable themes. Repetition is kept to a minimum here, which is certainly helpful for a game that usually has some kind of musical accompaniment. So I completely understand why the game has been received so fondly, and why some outlets have pegged it as an early Game of the Year contender. It's a confident, beautifully executed RPG that's a one-of-a-kind adventure. Visually speaking, Expedition 33 is a great-looking RPG that makes very effective use of the UE5 feature set. There's no individual element that really stunned me, but at the same time, the overall level of quality and polish impresses. Colorful designs and interesting artistic choices make the game especially memorable. Performance is very good as well. The game services its 30 and 60 FPS targets effectively, with only rare drops. This is up there with Je Sais and Fortnite in terms of delivering a decent 60 FPS experience with the top-end UE5 feature set on consoles. The Series S release is the only real sore point, with substantially degraded reflections and GI and no 60 FPS mode. On some level, it's par for the course for Series S releases, but the downgrades here are a little steeper than with most other UE5 games. So Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a compelling game on virtually all fronts, and comes highly recommended on PS5 Series X and PS5 Pro. RPG fans would be well advised to check it out. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfounder.net for exclusive and early access content, and to get in touch, use social media. Thanks for watching.